The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Kensington Palace, as Captain James Morrison adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. 23 years of service to the crown had taught him that perfection was not just expected, it was demanded. Every brass button gleamed, every crease was razor-sharp, and his black leather boots reflected the ornate ceiling above like mirrors. Today marked another routine day in what had become a predictable cycle of royal protection duties, or so he believed. James had joined the Royal Protection Squad straight out of the military, his distinguished service record in Afghanistan earning him rapid advancement through the ranks. His colleagues respected him for his unwavering dedication and his ability to remain invisible when necessary, a crucial skill when protecting members of the royal family. He had guarded prime ministers, foreign dignitaries, and senior royals through countless public engagements, never once allowing his professional facade to crack. The assignment briefing that morning had been straightforward enough. Prince Louis, now 14 years old, would be attending a private tutoring session in the palace's East Wing, followed by a scheduled meeting with his etiquette instructor. The young prince had been showing signs of rebellious behavior lately, nothing unusual for a teenager suddenly thrust into the spotlight of royal expectations. James had dealt with similar situations before with other members of the younger generation of royals. Prince Louis had always been different from his siblings, where Prince George displayed the measured composure expected of a future king, and Princess Charlotte showed natural grace in public appearances. Louis possessed an unpredictable energy that palace staff found both charming and challenging. His teachers often reported that while intellectually gifted, he struggled with the rigid protocols that governed royal behavior. The East Wing of Kensington Palace housed the private educational facilities used by the younger royals. Ancient tapestries lined the corridors, and portraits of long-dead monarchs seemed to watch from their gilded frames as James made his security sweep of the area. The tutoring room itself was a study in understated elegance, mahogany bookshelves reaching to the ceiling, leather-bound volumes that had educated generations of royals, and tall windows offering views of the perfectly manicured gardens beyond. Mrs. Pemberton, the etiquette instructor, arrived precisely at 10 o'clock as scheduled. A woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, she had served the royal household for over 3 decades. Her reputation for transforming even the most unruly young royals into polished public figures was legendary within palace circles. She carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, her steel-gray eyes missing nothing as she surveyed the room. "Good morning, Captain Morrison," she said with a slight nod, her voice carrying the crisp tones of received pronunciation. "I trust the prince will be joining us shortly?" James checked his watch, a habit ingrained through years of military precision. "Prince Louis should arrive within the next few minutes, ma'am." His mathematics tutorial concluded at 1/4 the hour. The sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor outside, and James positioned himself discreetly near the doorway. Prince Louis entered with the casual stride that had become his trademark, a deliberate rejection of the formal bearing his instructors constantly attempted to instill in him. His school uniform was impeccable, as always, but something in his demeanor suggested an underlying tension that James had begun to notice with increasing frequency over recent weeks. "Your Royal Highness, Mrs. Pickson." Pemberton began with a curtsy that somehow managed to convey both respect and mild disapproval. "Shall we begin with the proper forms of address for visiting dignitaries?" The lesson proceeded with predictable friction. Prince Louis answered questions correctly, but with an air of barely contained impatience. He fidgeted with his cufflinks, tapped his fingers against the mahogany desk, and frequently glanced toward the windows as if planning an escape route. James had observed similar behavior in young soldiers fresh out of training, the restlessness of someone chafing against rigid structure. "Your posture, Your Highness," Mrs. Pemberton corrected for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "Remember that every gesture is observed and interpreted by the public and the press. A slouching prince sends the wrong message about the monarchy's dignity." Prince Louis straightened momentarily before resuming his previous position. "Does it really matter how I sit when no one can see me except you and Captain Morrison?" "Every moment is practice for when the world is watching," Mrs. Pemberton replied firmly. "Excellence in public behavior comes from consistency in private behavior." Your grandfather understood this principle perfectly. The mention of his grandfather seemed to strike a nerve. Prince Louis's jaw tightened slightly, and James noticed his hands clench into fists before relaxing again. The late Prince Philip had indeed been known for his strict adherence to protocol, but also for his sometimes harsh methods of instilling discipline in the younger royals. As the lesson continued, James found his attention drawn to subtle changes in the prince's behavior. The teenager kept tugging at his sleeves, not in the typical nervous gesture James had observed before, but with what seemed like deliberate intent to ensure they remained pulled down. When Mrs. Pemberton requested that he demonstrate the proper way to greet a foreign ambassador, complete with the appropriate hand gestures, Prince Louis hesitated noticeably. "Your Highness? Mrs. Pemberton prompted, her tone sharpening with impatience. "Could we perhaps practice the verbal components first?" Prince Louis asked, his voice carrying an unusual note of uncertainty. "Nonsense. Physical presentation is equally important as verbal communication. Please demonstrate the full greeting protocol." James watched as internal conflict played across the young prince's features. Protocol demanded that royal children learn to mask their emotions effectively, but Prince Louis had always worn his feelings more openly than his siblings. Something was clearly troubling him, beyond the usual adolescent resistance to formal instruction. The remainder of the lesson passed with mounting tension. Prince Louis complied with instructions but with visible reluctance, particularly when required to use hand gestures or remove his blazer for posture correction. Mrs. Pemberton, accustomed to absolute obedience from her royal pupils, grew increasingly frustrated with what she perceived as deliberate defiance. When the lesson concluded, Mrs. Pemberton gathered her materials with barely concealed irritation. "Your Highness, I shall be speaking with your private secretary about today's session." This level of resistance to instruction is unbecoming of a member of the royal family. Prince Louis offered a perfunctory bow but said nothing in response. James noticed how quickly the teenager pulled his blazer back on and adjusted his sleeves once again. As Mrs. Grand Pemberton departed with clicking heels echoing down the corridor. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. "Are you feeling well today, Your Highness?" James asked, his professional training telling him that something beyond typical teenage rebellion was at play. Prince Louis looked up with eyes that seemed older than his 14 years. "I'm fine, Captain Morrison. Just tired of being treated like a mannequin to be posed and positioned according to someone else's vision of perfection." The response was more philosophical than James typically heard from the young prince. Usually, Louis expressed his frustrations through action rather than words, practical jokes, deliberate breaches of minor protocols, or simply finding creative ways to avoid his lessons altogether. This verbal articulation of his feelings suggested deeper contemplation of his situation. "The training can be challenging," James acknowledged carefully, "but it prepares you for the responsibilities you'll carry throughout your life." "Does it?" Prince Louis asked, moving to stand by the tall windows overlooking the gardens. "Or does it just teach you to hide who you really are behind a mask of royal propriety?" James had heard similar questions from other young royals over the years, but something in Prince Louis's tone suggested this wasn't merely philosophical curiosity. The teenager seemed to be grappling with something specific rather than abstract concepts of royal duty versus personal freedom. The afternoon proceeded with scheduled activities: a private piano lesson, time allocated for homework completion, and a brief meeting with his private secretary to review upcoming public engagements. Throughout each activity, James maintained his professional vigilance while growing increasingly concerned about the prince's subdued demeanor. During the piano lesson, Prince Louis's usual musical expressiveness seemed muted. His technique remained flawless. Years of instruction had ensured that, but the emotional connection to the music that typically characterized his playing was notably absent. His instructor, Mr. Hartwell, commented on the technical precision while gently questioning the lack of passion in the performance. "Music should come from within, Your Highness, Mr. Hartwell observed during a pause between pieces. "Today your playing feels constrained." Prince Louis's fingers stilled on the keys. Perhaps that's appropriate. Everything else about my life is constrained." The comment hung in the air like a discordant note. Mr. Hartwell, a gentleman in his 70s who had taught music to 3 generations of royals, looked genuinely concerned. He had known Prince Louis since childhood, and recognized that this philosophical melancholy was uncharacteristic of the normally spirited teenager. As the day progressed toward evening, James found himself paying closer attention to details he might normally have overlooked. The way Prince Louis consistently kept his sleeves pulled down, even when the room grew warm, the careful positioning of his arms to avoid certain angles or movements, the subtle but persistent adjustment of his clothing throughout the day. During the homework period, Prince Louis worked on an essay about British constitutional history. James, stationed discreetly nearby, observed the prince's writing posture and noticed how he favored his left arm, keeping his right arm positioned to minimize movement of the shoulder and upper arm area. For someone trained to observe potential security threats, these physical tells suggested either injury or deliberate concealment. The meeting with his private secretary, Miss Catherine Whitmore, proved particularly revealing. As they reviewed his calendar for the following week, which included a charity gala, a school sports day, and a family portrait session, Prince Louis showed unusual concern about the specific requirements for each event. "The charity gala requires formal evening wear, correct?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Yes, Your Highness. White tie, as indicated in the briefing materials." "And the family portraits? What type of clothing will be required?" Whitmore consulted her notes. "The photographer has requested both formal and casual options. Some shots will be in morning dress, others in simple shirts and trousers for a more relaxed family atmosphere." James noticed how Prince Louis's jaw tightened slightly at the mention of simple shirts. The reaction was subtle but consistent with the pattern of responses he'd observed throughout the day whenever clothing changes or arm movements were discussed. As evening approached and the day's scheduled activities concluded, James prepared for the standard end-of-shift briefing. Protocol required a summary of the day's events, noting any security concerns, unusual incidents, or matters requiring follow-up attention. Normally, such reports were routine, a few sentences confirming that the day had proceeded without incident. Tonight felt different. James found himself struggling with the line between professional duty and personal concern. His training told him to document observable facts while avoiding speculation. Yet the accumulated evidence of the prince's unusual behavior suggested something that might require intervention, even if he couldn't yet identify what that something might be. Prince Louis had retreated to his private quarters for the evening, and James completed his security sweep of the surrounding areas. The ancient palace walls seemed to absorb sound, creating an atmosphere of profound quiet broken only by the distant footsteps of other staff members completing their own duties. In his small office adjacent to the royal quarters, James sat down to complete his daily report. The cursor blinked on his computer screen as he considered how to accurately document his observations without overstepping professional boundaries. Royal protection officers were expected to be invisible observers, not analysts of their charge's emotional states. Yet something nagged at his trained instincts, the same instincts that had kept him and his comrades alive during multiple deployments overseas. The ability to read subtle signs, to notice patterns that suggested impending problems, had been crucial to his survival in hostile environments. Now those same instincts were telling him that Prince Louis was dealing with something beyond typical teenage angst. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside interrupted his contemplation. James glanced at his watch, nearly 9 o'clock, past the time when most palace staff would be moving through the residential areas. He moved to his doorway and observed a figure approaching from the direction of Prince Louis's quarters. It was Prince Louis himself, moving with unusual stealth for someone in his own home. He was dressed in casual clothes, jeans and a long-sleeved shirt despite the warm evening weather. His movement seemed purposeful but cautious, as if he was attempting to avoid being observed. James faced an immediate decision. Protocol suggested he should announce his presence and inquire about the prince's destination. Royal family members, particularly younger ones, were not supposed to move through the palace unescorted during evening hours. Yet something about the prince's behavior suggested that direct confrontation might not be the most productive approach. Instead, James chose to follow at a discreet distance, maintaining visual contact while avoiding detection. His military training in surveillance served him well as he tracked the young prince through the labyrinthine corridors of Kensington Palace. Prince Louis seemed to know exactly where he was going, moving with the confidence of someone familiar with routes that avoided the main staff areas. The destination proved to be one of the palace's smaller reception rooms. a space typically used for intimate family gatherings rather than official functions. Prince Louis entered and closed the door behind him, but James's position allowed him to observe through a partially opened connecting door to an adjacent room. What he saw in that moment changed everything he thought he knew about his charge and forced him to confront a situation that would challenge every aspect of his professional training and personal integrity. Prince Louis had rolled up his sleeves, revealing what James could clearly see were unmistakable signs of physical abuse, bruises in various stages of healing, marking patterns that spoke of repeated, deliberate violence. The young prince stood before an ornate mirror, examining his arms with the detached fascination of someone cataloging damage. James watched in growing horror as Prince Louis carefully tested the range of motion in his right shoulder, wincing slightly as he raised his arm above a certain angle. The clinical way he assessed his own injuries suggested this was a routine he had performed many times before. James's mind raced through the implications of what he was witnessing. Someone within the royal circle, someone with regular access to Prince Louis, was physically harming him. The careful concealment, the consistent sleeve adjustments, the reluctance to participate in activities requiring arm movement all suddenly made terrible sense. As he watched Prince Louis methodically examine each visible injury, James realized that his comfortable world of royal protocol and predictable security duties had just collapsed entirely. He was no longer simply protecting a young prince from external threats. He was potentially the only person who could protect him from threats that existed within the very system designed to safeguard him. The weight of this knowledge settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. Every decision he made from this moment forward would carry consequences that extended far beyond his own career or reputation. The life and welfare of a 14-year-old boy had just become his responsibility in ways that no training manual had ever prepared him to handle. Prince Louis finished his self-examination and began rolling his sleeves back down, preparing to return to his quarters. James retreated to his office, his mind spinning with questions that had no easy answers. Who could be responsible for such injuries? How long had this been going on? Why had no one else noticed the signs that now seemed so obvious in retrospect? As he heard the prince's footsteps receding down the corridor, James stared at his computer screen and the half-completed daily report. The cursor continued to blink, waiting for him to decide how to document what could be the most important day of his career, and possibly the most dangerous. Sleep eluded James Morrison that night. He lay in his modest apartment near the palace, staring at the ceiling while his mind replayed the scene he had witnessed. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Prince Louis examining his injuries with that terrible clinical detachment. The image burned in his memory like a photograph he couldn't unsee. By dawn, James had made his decision. He would conduct his own investigation, carefully and methodically, before involving anyone else. 23 years of service had taught him that accusations within royal circles required ironclad evidence. A wrong move could not only end his career but potentially put Prince Louis in greater danger. The morning briefing proceeded as usual, with department heads reviewing security schedules and discussing upcoming royal engagements. James participated with his characteristic professionalism, but his attention was focused on studying his colleagues with new eyes. Someone in this room, or someone with similar access to the royal family, was responsible for the injuries he had seen. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Hartwell, from the Metropolitan Police's Royal Protection Command, was reviewing security arrangements for an upcoming state visit. James had worked with her on several occasions and respected her thoroughness and discretion. She might eventually become a crucial ally, but not until he had gathered more evidence. "Captain Morrison," she addressed him during the briefing, "you'll be primary protection for Prince Louis during the charity gala tomorrow evening." "Any concerns about the venue security?" "None at this time, ma'am," James replied, though privately he was already formulating plans to use the event as an opportunity for closer observation. "I'll complete a final security sweep this afternoon." The charity gala would be Prince Louis's first major public appearance since James had discovered the truth about his injuries. The event would require formal evening wear, white tie, as Miss Whitmore had mentioned, which meant short sleeves and minimal coverage. James wondered how the prince planned to conceal his injuries in such attire. After the briefing, James positioned himself strategically to observe the various palace staff members who had regular contact with Prince Louis. The list was longer than he had initially considered. Tutors, instructors, personal servants, kitchen staff, maintenance workers, and fellow protection officers. Each person represented a potential threat that had been hiding in plain sight. Mrs. Pemberton arrived for her scheduled etiquette lesson with Prince Louis, her silver hair as severely styled as always. James watched her interaction with the prince more carefully than ever before, noting every gesture and vocal inflection. The elderly instructor maintained her usual authoritarian demeanor, but James detected nothing overtly threatening in her behavior. However, he did observe something troubling. When Mrs. Pemberton requested that Prince Louis practice formal dining postures, she physically adjusted his arm position twice. Both times, the prince tensed visibly, and James noticed him glance quickly toward the windows as if considering escape routes. The instructor's touch was brief and seemingly innocent, but Prince Louis's reaction suggested associations with less benign physical contact. "Your form is improving, Your Highness," Mrs. Pemberton noted with grudging approval, "though you still tend to favor your left side. Proper posture requires balanced positioning of both arms." Prince Louis nodded silently, but James saw how he subtly shifted to minimize the visibility of his right arm. The etiquette instructor seemed oblivious to the prince's discomfort, focused entirely on technical correctness rather than the underlying reasons for his awkward positioning. During the piano lesson that followed, James paid particular attention to Mr. Hartwell's interaction with the prince. The elderly music instructor had served the royal family for decades and possessed the gentle demeanor that had made him a favorite among younger royals. His teaching method involved occasional physical guidance, positioning fingers on keys, adjusting posture for proper technique, but Prince Louis showed no signs of distress during these interactions. "Your technique continues to improve, Your Highness," Mr. Calley Hartwell observed as Prince Louis completed a complex piece by Chopin. "Though I sense some tension in your right shoulder. Perhaps we should focus on relaxation exercises?" The comment was innocuous enough, but James noticed Prince Louis's immediate defensive response. "I'm fine, Mr. Rulev." "Hartwell, perhaps we could work on a different piece instead?" The music instructor looked puzzled but complied with the request. James made a mental note that the prince's right shoulder, the same area where he had observed bruising, was apparently affecting his musical performance as well as his other activities. As the day progressed, James expanded his observation to include staff members with less direct contact but regular access to the royal quarters. Palace maintenance workers who possessed keys to virtually every room moved through the residential areas with minimal supervision. Cleaning staff had access to private spaces during specific hours when the royal family was occupied elsewhere. One individual who drew James's attention was Thomas Blackwood, a senior valet who had joined the palace staff approximately 6 months earlier. His references had been impeccable, previous service with several prominent aristocratic families, but James realized he had never observed the man's direct interaction with Prince Louis. Blackwood carried himself with the perfect bearing expected of senior palace staff, impeccably dressed, deferentially polite, and virtually invisible during his duties. Yet something about his interactions with other staff members suggested an underlying arrogance that contrasted sharply with his obsequious behavior toward senior royals. During the afternoon, James arranged to be present when Blackwood was attending to duties in the corridor outside Prince Louis's quarters. The valet moved efficiently through his tasks, but James noticed how his demeanor changed when he believed himself unobserved. The respectful posture shifted to something more predatory, and his eyes lingered on the doors to the royal bedrooms with what seemed like inappropriate interest. "Good afternoon, Captain Morrison," Blackwood said when he noticed James's presence. His voice carried the refined accent typical of senior palace staff, but James detected something artificial about it, as if the man was consciously performing a role rather than speaking naturally. "Blackwood," James replied with a neutral nod. "How are you finding your service here?" "Most rewarding, Captain. The royal family has been exceedingly kind, particularly the younger members. Prince Louis especially has been quite accommodating to my efforts to maintain proper standards." The phrasing struck James as oddly specific. Most staff members would speak generally about their duties or express gratitude for the opportunity to serve. Blackwood's comment about Prince Louis being accommodating suggested a more personal relationship than would be typical between a valet and a teenage royal. "Prince Louis can be quite spirited," James observed carefully, watching for any reaction. Blackwood's smile never wavered, but something flickered in his eyes, a brief flash of what looked like satisfaction or perhaps dominance. "Indeed, Captain. Though I find that young people often benefit from firm guidance in learning proper behavior, structure and discipline are essential for character development." The response sent a chill down James's spine. While the words themselves were unremarkable, countless adults had expressed similar sentiments about the importance of discipline. The undertone suggested something more sinister. Combined with Prince Louis's visible injuries and behavioral changes, Blackwood's comments took on a threatening quality. James spent the remainder of the afternoon discreetly researching Thomas Blackwood's background. The valet's personnel file contained all the standard documentation: employment history, character references, security clearance approval. Yet as James studied the details more carefully, inconsistencies began to emerge. The timing of Blackwood's previous employment showed suspicious gaps that hadn't been adequately explained during the hiring process. His references, while glowing in their praise, came from employers who were either deceased or living abroad, making verification difficult. Most troubling, the security background check had been expedited through channels that bypassed some of the more thorough investigative procedures typically required for palace staff. As evening approached, James prepared for what he hoped would be a crucial test of his suspicions. Prince Louis was scheduled for a formal dinner with visiting family members, an event that would require the assistance of senior staff, including Thomas Blackwood, in preparation and presentation. James positioned himself where he could observe the preparation process while maintaining his security duties. Prince Louis appeared in his private quarters wearing casual clothes, ready to be dressed for the formal dinner. Protocol required that senior valets assist with complex formal attire, particularly the intricate details of white tie dress. What James witnessed in the following minutes confirmed his worst fears and provided the evidence he needed to take action. When Thomas Blackwood entered Prince Louis's quarters to assist with dressing, the young prince's entire demeanor changed. The slight rebellion and spirited energy that characterized his normal behavior vanished, replaced by a compliant stillness that spoke of learned fear. "Good evening, Your Highness," Blackwood said with his characteristic deference. But James noticed how the man's posture shifted once the door was partially closed. The servile bearing straightened into something more commanding, and his voice dropped to a tone that carried implicit threat. Through the partially open door, James could observe the dressing process. Blackwood's assistance with the formal shirt involved positioning Prince Louis's arms in ways that clearly caused pain. Each time the prince winced or tried to adjust his positioning, Blackwood's grip would tighten, accompanied by whispered comments too quiet for James to hear, but clearly effective in maintaining the young man's cooperation. The most damning evidence came when Blackwood rolled up Prince Louis's shirt sleeves to properly fit the formal cufflinks. James had a clear view of the bruising on both arms, and he watched as Blackwood deliberately pressed his fingers against what were obviously recent injuries. Prince Louis's face went white with pain, but he made no sound of protest. "Remember, Your Highness," Blackwood said in a voice just loud enough for James to hear, "proper presentation is essential. Any imperfections in your appearance tonight would reflect poorly on both of us." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Blackwood was using Prince Louis's injuries as a means of control, ensuring his compliance through the threat of additional pain. The young prince nodded silently, his eyes fixed on the floor in a posture of complete submission that was heartbreaking to witness. James had seen enough. Every instinct he possessed as both a soldier and a protector was screaming that he needed to act immediately. Yet he also recognized that the situation required careful handling. A direct confrontation could put Prince Louis in immediate danger, while premature accusations without proper evidence could allow Blackwood to escape justice. As the dressing process concluded and Prince Louis was prepared for the formal dinner, James made his decision. He would document everything he had observed and witnessed, then present his findings to Detective Chief Inspector Hartwell. The Metropolitan Police's Royal Protection Command had the authority and resources to handle such a sensitive situation properly. But first, he needed to ensure Prince Louis's immediate safety. The formal dinner would provide several hours during which Blackwood would have no legitimate access to the prince. James would use that time to compile his evidence and alert the proper authorities. The dinner proceeded with typical royal formality. Prince Louis performed his public role flawlessly, displaying none of the fear or pain James had witnessed earlier. The young prince, engaged in polite conversation with visiting relatives, demonstrated perfect table manners and showed no outward signs of distress. Yet James could see the effort required to maintain this facade, the careful positioning to minimize arm movement, the subtle favoring of his uninjured side, the controlled breathing that suggested ongoing physical discomfort. During a break between courses, James excused himself from the dining room and placed a secure call to Detective Chief Inspector Hartwell. The conversation was brief but urgent, conveying the essential facts without providing details that might compromise the investigation. "I need to meet with you tonight," James said when Hartwell answered her phone. "We have a situation involving Prince Louis that requires immediate attention." The experienced detective recognized the gravity in his tone. "My office in 1 hour. Come alone and bring whatever evidence you have." James spent the remaining dinner hour observing Thomas Blackwood's behavior from a distance. The valet performed his duties with characteristic efficiency, but James now recognized the predatory calculation behind his professional demeanor. Every interaction with junior staff members revealed a personality that enjoyed exercising power over those in vulnerable positions. When the dinner concluded and Prince Louis retired to his quarters, James ensured that additional security personnel were positioned nearby, a precaution he justified as routine enhanced protection for visiting family members. In reality, he was creating a barrier between Blackwood and his victim while the formal investigation began. The drive to Detective Chief Inspector Hartwell's office gave James time to organize his thoughts and prepare for what he knew would be a career-defining conversation. The evidence he had gathered was compelling but circumstantial. The bruising he had observed could potentially be explained by sports activities or accidental injuries. Blackwood's behavior, while troubling, might be interpreted as excessive strictness rather than abuse. Yet James knew what he had seen, and his experience told him that Prince Louis was in genuine danger. The pattern of physical injuries, behavioral changes, and psychological submission painted a clear picture of ongoing abuse by someone in a position of authority and trust. Detective Chief Inspector Hartwell's office was located in a secure building adjacent to New Scotland Yard, equipped with the specialized communication and investigation resources required for royal protection matters. When James arrived, he found Hartwell waiting with the serious expression of someone prepared for a crisis. "Tell me everything," she said without preamble, activating recording equipment that would create an official record of his statement. James began his account with the observations from the previous day, describing Prince Louis's unusual behavior during the etiquette lesson and the evening surveillance that had revealed his injuries. He provided detailed descriptions of the bruising patterns, the prince's behavioral changes, and the systematic way he had been concealing his condition. When he reached the events of the current day and his observations of Thomas Blackwood, Hartwell's expression grew increasingly grave. The detective had encountered similar cases during her career, though never involving someone of Prince Louis's prominence and visibility. "You're absolutely certain about what you observed during the dressing process?" she asked, making notes on a secure tablet. "Completely certain," James replied. "Blackwood was deliberately causing pain and using threats to ensure compliance. Prince Louis was terrified of him." Hartwell nodded grimly. "We'll need to move quickly but carefully. An investigation involving a member of the royal family requires coordination with multiple agencies and approval from the highest levels. But first we need to ensure Prince Louis's immediate safety." The plan they developed over the following hour was complex but necessary. Blackwood would be discreetly removed from duty pending a security review, a common occurrence that wouldn't immediately raise suspicions. Prince Louis would be assigned additional protection under the guise of enhanced security for upcoming public engagements. Most importantly, specialized officers trained in dealing with abuse victims would conduct careful interviews to document the full extent of what had occurred. As James left Hartwell's office in the early morning hours, he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The investigation he had set in motion would inevitably become public knowledge, creating a scandal that would rock the monarchy. Yet the alternative, allowing the abuse to continue, was unthinkable. The palace was quiet when he returned, with only essential overnight staff moving through the corridors. James checked on Prince Louis's quarters and confirmed that additional security personnel were maintaining their discreet watch. The young prince was sleeping, hopefully more peacefully than he had in months. In his own office, James completed the most important report of his career. Every detail was carefully documented. every observation recorded with the precision that would be required for legal proceedings. When he finished, he encrypted the file and sent copies to Detective Chief Inspector Hartwell and her supervisors. The alarm that would soon echo through the highest levels of government and the royal household had been triggered. Now James could only wait and hope that his actions would be sufficient to protect a vulnerable young prince from further harm. The emergency meeting convened at 6 o'clock the following morning in a secure conference room deep within Buckingham Palace. The attendees represented the highest levels of royal security, law enforcement, and palace administration. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Hartwell, Assistant Commissioner David Reynolds from the Metropolitan Police, Sir Nicholas Thornfield from the royal household, and James Morrison, whose report had triggered the crisis. The atmosphere in the room was tense with the gravity of the situation. Each person present understood that the allegations, if proven true, would constitute not only a criminal matter, but a catastrophic failure of the systems designed to protect the royal family. The potential for public scandal was immense, but the welfare of Prince Louis took precedence over all other considerations. Sir Nicholas Thornfield, a career civil servant with 4 decades of royal service, appeared haggard despite his typically immaculate appearance. As private secretary to their majesties, he bore ultimate responsibility for the household's functioning and the security of family members. His hands trembled slightly as he reviewed James's detailed report. "Captain Morrison," he began, his voice carrying the strain of someone grappling with an unprecedented crisis. "Your observations are deeply troubling. If accurate, they represent a betrayal of trust that strikes at the heart of our most fundamental duties." Detective Chief Inspector Hartwell had spent the early morning hours coordinating with specialized units trained in handling sensitive abuse cases. "We need to approach this systematically," she explained, addressing the assembled group. "Our primary objective must be Prince Louis's safety, but we also need to gather evidence that will stand up in court while protecting the integrity of any investigation." Assistant Commissioner Reynolds, a stern-faced man with extensive experience in high-profile cases, outlined the immediate steps required. "We'll need to conduct forensic examination of the injuries, formal interviews with Prince Louis using specially trained officers, and a comprehensive investigation into Thomas Blackwood's background and activities." The challenge facing them was unprecedented in the modern era of royal protection. While historical accounts contained references to various scandals and improprieties within royal households, the current system of professional security and oversight was supposed to prevent such situations from occurring. The fact that systematic abuse had apparently continued undetected for months represented a fundamental breakdown of multiple safeguards. James found himself at the center of discussions about investigative procedures, his military background and observational skills making him crucial to understanding the full scope of what had occurred. "The bruising patterns I observed were consistent with deliberate infliction," he explained to the assembled investigators. "The locations and stages of healing suggest ongoing, systematic abuse rather than accidental injuries." Sir Nicholas Thornfield raised the delicate matter of informing the Prince and Princess of Wales. "Their Highnesses are currently on official duties abroad," he noted, "but they must be informed immediately. This situation will require their direct involvement and decision-making regarding Prince Louis's care and the investigation's scope." The complexity of the situation extended beyond the immediate criminal investigation. Royal protection protocols would need to be completely reviewed and potentially restructured. Staff screening procedures that had failed to identify Blackwood's true nature would require comprehensive examination. Most critically, Prince Louis would need specialized psychological support to help him recover from what he had endured. Detective Chief Inspector Hartwell had arranged for Dr. Margaret Ashworth, a forensic psychologist specializing in trauma cases involving children and adolescents, to join the investigative team. Her expertise would be crucial in ensuring that Prince Louis received appropriate support while also documenting the psychological impact of his experiences. "We need to understand that Prince Louis has likely been living in a state of chronic fear and anxiety," Dr. Ashworth explained during her briefing to the team. "His compliance with his abuser's demands, his attempts to conceal his injuries, and his continued participation in royal duties despite significant physical pain all indicate sophisticated psychological manipulation." The investigation team faced the challenge of conducting their work while maintaining absolute confidentiality. News of the situation could not be allowed to leak prematurely, both to protect Prince Louis's privacy and to prevent potential interference with the investigation. This requirement meant that interviews, evidence collection, and other investigative activities would need to be conducted under the guise of routine security procedures. James was assigned to coordinate with the investigative team while maintaining his regular protection duties. His unique position as both a witness to the abuse and a trusted member of Prince Louis's security detail made him invaluable in ensuring the prince's cooperation with the investigation while protecting him from further harm. The first formal interview with Prince Louis was scheduled for that afternoon, conducted in a private room within Kensington Palace that had been equipped with discreet recording equipment. Dr. Ashworth would lead the conversation, using techniques specifically designed to help traumatized young people discuss difficult experiences without causing additional psychological harm. James was present during the interview to provide reassurance and continuity for Prince Louis, who had developed trust in the captain over their months of working together. The prince's initial response to questions about his injuries was predictably defensive. He had been conditioned to protect his abuser and to view his own safety as secondary to avoiding scandal or inconvenience. "I don't understand why everyone is making such a fuss," Prince Louis said, his voice carrying a forced casualness that didn't quite mask underlying anxiety. "I've just been clumsy lately, bumping into things during sports activities." Ashworth's gentle persistence gradually broke through these defenses. Her approach focused on validating Prince Louis's experiences rather than challenging his explanations, creating a safe space for him to begin acknowledging what had actually occurred. "It must have been very difficult to deal with these injuries while maintaining your public duties," she observed. "That shows remarkable strength and dedication." The comment seemed to unlock something in Prince Louis. For the first time since James had begun observing him closely, the young prince's carefully maintained composure began to crack. Tears welled in his eyes as he struggled with the decision to reveal the truth about his situation. "I couldn't let anyone know," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "He said it would destroy the family's reputation. He said I was being ungrateful and selfish for complaining about what was necessary for my development." The revelation that followed was heartbreaking in its detail. Prince Louis described months of escalating abuse, beginning with what Blackwood had characterized as corrective discipline for perceived failures in royal protocol. The valet had convinced the prince that his experiences were normal consequences of his position, that previous generations of royals had undergone similar training to prepare them for their duties. The psychological manipulation had been sophisticated and effective. Blackwood had isolated Prince Louis by convincing him that reporting the abuse would cause immense damage to his family and the monarchy. He had used the prince's natural desire to fulfill his royal responsibilities as a weapon against him, framing the abuse as necessary preparation for future duties. "He told me that my grandfather had received similar training," Prince Louis revealed during one particularly difficult moment in the interview. "He said that strength of character could only be developed through adversity, and that complaining or seeking help would prove I was unworthy of my position." James felt physically ill as he listened to these revelations. The systematic nature of the psychological abuse was almost worse than the physical injuries. Blackwood had carefully constructed a narrative that made Prince Louis complicit in his own victimization, believing that he deserved the treatment he was receiving. The interview process continued for several hours, with breaks to allow Prince Louis to process emotions and recover from the difficulty of revealing experiences he had been conditioned to hide. Dr. Chent, Ashworth's expertise was evident in her ability to guide the conversation while respecting the prince's psychological state and emotional needs. During one break, James observed Prince Louis sitting alone in the garden outside the interview room. The young prince appeared smaller somehow, as if acknowledging his victimization had physically diminished him. Yet there was also something different about his posture, a subtle relaxation that suggested the beginning of relief at no longer carrying his terrible secret alone. "Captain Morrison," Prince Louis said when James approached, "I need you to know that I never intended for any of this to become your problem. I tried to handle it myself." The statement revealed both Prince Louis's fundamental decency and the impossible burden he had been carrying. A 14-year-old boy, despite his royal status and privileges, was still just a child who should never have been expected to endure such treatment in silence. "Your Highness," James replied carefully, "protecting you is not a problem, it's my honor and my duty. What happened to you was not your fault, and you showed tremendous courage in enduring it for so long." The afternoon's revelations provided investigators with detailed accounts of Blackwood's methods and the scope of his abuse. The valet had used his position of trust and authority to access Prince Louis's private quarters regularly, often under the pretense of wardrobe maintenance or preparation for official functions. These encounters had provided opportunities for physical abuse, while also allowing Blackwood to reinforce his psychological control. The medical examination that followed confirmed the physical evidence of systematic abuse. Dr. Caroline Westbrook, a forensic physician experienced in examining assault victims, documented injuries in various stages of healing that corroborated Prince Louis's account of ongoing violence. The pattern and distribution of these injuries are consistent with deliberate infliction, Dr. Westbrook reported to the investigative team. The locations suggest someone familiar with causing pain while minimizing visible evidence, targeting areas typically covered by clothing. Meanwhile, the investigation into Thomas Blackwood's background had revealed a disturbing history that had somehow escaped detection during the hiring process. Assistant Commissioner Reynolds briefed the team on their findings, painting a picture of a man who had systematically sought positions that provided access to vulnerable individuals. Blackwood's previous employment with aristocratic families ended under suspicious circumstances in at least 3 instances, Reynolds reported. In each case, his departure was arranged quietly, with financial settlements that included non-disclosure agreements. "We're working to contact former employers and potential victims, though the agreements make investigation challenging." The revelation that Blackwood was potentially a serial abuser with multiple victims added urgency to the investigation. His careful selection of positions within elite households suggested a predator who understood how class dynamics and concern for reputation could be used to silence victims and avoid prosecution. Sir Nicholas Thornfield faced the grim task of informing senior members of the royal family about the situation. The Prince and Princess of Wales were cutting short their official overseas visit to return immediately. Other family members would need to be briefed, both to provide support for Prince Louis and to ensure their own safety and that of their children. The practical challenges of the investigation were enormous. Blackwood's arrest would need to be coordinated carefully to prevent flight or destruction of evidence, while also minimizing public attention that could compromise Prince Louis's privacy. Search warrants for his residence and personal effects would need to be executed simultaneously with his detention. James found himself reflecting on the signs he had missed or misinterpreted over the months preceding his crucial observations. The prince's behavioral changes, his reluctance to participate in certain activities, his careful management of his physical presentation, all had been visible to anyone paying close attention. "I should have recognized what was happening sooner," he confided to Detective Chief Inspector Hartwell during a brief break in the day's proceedings. "Predators like Blackwood are skilled at concealment," she replied. "His methods were sophisticated, and Prince Louis's efforts to hide the abuse were unfortunately effective. The important thing is that you recognized the situation when you did and took appropriate action." As evening approached, the investigative team prepared for the next phase of their work. Blackwood would be arrested the following morning, triggering a process that would inevitably lead to public exposure, despite their efforts at discretion. The priority now was ensuring that Prince Louis received the support and protection he needed while the legal process unfolded. The young prince was currently under enhanced protection in secure quarters, with specially trained personnel ensuring his safety and well-being. Dr. Ashworth would continue working with him to address the psychological trauma he had experienced, while medical professionals monitored his recovery from physical injuries. James completed his evening security sweep with a profound sense of both relief and apprehension. Relief that Prince Louis was finally safe from his abuser, but apprehension about the challenges that lay ahead. The investigation and subsequent legal proceedings would be intensely scrutinized, with every detail examined by media, legal professionals, and the public. The monarchy itself would face questions about how such abuse could have occurred within their most secure environments. Calls for reform of protection protocols, staff screening procedures, and oversight mechanisms would be inevitable. The institution that prized discretion and tradition would be forced to confront uncomfortable questions about transparency and accountability. Yet, as James observed the additional security personnel maintaining their protective watch over Prince Louis's quarters, he felt confident that the most important objective had been achieved. A vulnerable young person was no longer suffering in silence, and his abuser would face justice for the crimes committed. The alarm had been triggered, the investigation launched, and the protective systems of the monarchy mobilized to defend one of its most precious members. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the legal process began, but tonight, Prince Louis could sleep safely for the first time in months. Dawn had barely broken over London when the coordinated operation began. At precisely 6 o'clock in the morning, plainclothes Metropolitan Police officers surrounded Thomas Blackwood's modest flat in South Kensington. Simultaneously, teams executed search warrants at his previous residences and storage facilities, while digital forensics experts prepared to examine his electronic devices and communications. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Hartwell led the arrest team, accompanied by specialists trained in handling potentially dangerous suspects. Blackwood's psychological profile suggested someone capable of violence when cornered, and his intimate knowledge of royal protection protocols made him particularly dangerous if he chose to resist. The arrest itself proceeded without incident, though Blackwood's reaction provided disturbing insights into his character. Rather than expressing surprise or confusion at the charges, he displayed a cold calculation that suggested he had been prepared for this possibility. His first words upon being informed of his arrest were not protestations of innocence, but demands to speak with a lawyer specializing in confidentiality agreements. "I assume this relates to some misunderstanding about my training methods," he said with chilling composure as handcuffs were applied. "I'm certain that once the full context is explained, reasonable people will understand the necessity of maintaining proper standards." Even in custody, Blackwood was attempting to frame his abuse as legitimate discipline, revealing the depth of his delusion and manipulation. His confidence suggested he believed his psychological control over Prince Louis was so complete that the young prince would never have willingly revealed the truth. Meanwhile, at Kensington Palace, Prince Louis was beginning his first full day of freedom from his abuser's control. The relief was evident in his demeanor, though the psychological impact of his experiences would require extensive support and healing. Dr. Margaret Ashworth had arranged for ongoing counseling sessions designed specifically for his unique circumstances. James Morrison found himself in an unusual position, no longer just a protection officer, but a crucial witness in a case that would reshape royal security protocols. His detailed observations and careful documentation had provided the foundation for the investigation, but now he faced the challenge of supporting Prince Louis through the difficult process of formal testimony and legal proceedings. The Prince and Princess of Wales arrived at Heathrow Airport that morning, having cut short their official visit to Australia upon receiving news of their son's situation. Their faces, captured by telephoto lenses from distant paparazzi, showed the strain of parents grappling with their child's trauma while maintaining their public composure. Sir Nicholas Thornfield met them at a private terminal, briefing them during the drive to Kensington Palace on the investigation's progress and the evidence that had been uncovered. The conversation was undoubtedly one of the most difficult in the private secretary's long career, involving not just the details of the abuse, but the systematic failures that had allowed it to occur. "How did we not know?" the Princess of Wales reportedly asked, her voice breaking with anguish that no amount of royal training could disguise. "How did someone hurt our son for months while we were completely unaware?" The question would haunt not only the royal parents, but everyone involved in Prince Louis's care and protection. The investigation was already revealing multiple points where different actions might have prevented or shortened his ordeal. Warning signs had been present but misinterpreted, protocols had been followed but proved inadequate, and trust had been placed in someone who had systematically exploited it. James was present when the Prince and Princess of Wales reunited with their son. The private meeting took place in a secure room within Kensington Palace, with only Dr. Ashworth present to provide psychological support if needed. The reunion was emotionally overwhelming for all involved, combining relief, guilt, anger, and profound love in ways that transcended royal protocol and public expectations. Prince Louis's first words to his parents were characteristically focused on protecting others rather than himself. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you," he whispered through tears. He said it would hurt the family and the monarchy. "I thought I was doing the right thing by staying quiet." The statement revealed the sophisticated nature of Blackwood's psychological manipulation, which had exploited Prince Louis's natural sense of duty and responsibility. The abuser had twisted the young prince's best qualities, his loyalty, discretion, and commitment to his role, into weapons that ensured his silence and compliance. The search of Blackwood's residence yielded disturbing evidence of premeditation and pattern behavior. Hidden cameras had been discovered, along with detailed notes about the daily routines and vulnerabilities of various royal household members. Most chilling was a journal documenting his training sessions with Prince Louis, written in clinical language that revealed his complete lack of empathy or recognition of wrongdoing.
Subject continues to respond well to corrective measures. Read one entry that Detective Chief Inspector Hartwell found particularly disturbing. Resistance has decreased significantly since implementation of consequence protocols.
Physical conditioning progressing as expected. The dehumanizing language confirmed that Blackwood viewed Prince Louis not as a person deserving of respect and protection, but as a subject for his experiments in control and domination. The journal entries would provide powerful evidence in court while also revealing the calculated nature of his abuse. Digital forensics examination of Blackwood's devices uncovered communications with other individuals that suggested a network of predators sharing information about potential victims within elite households.
The investigation was rapidly expanding beyond a single case of abuse to encompass what appeared to be an organized effort to infiltrate and exploit vulnerable positions within aristocratic and royal circles. Assistant Commissioner Reynolds coordinated with international law enforcement agencies as the scope of the investigation broadened. Similar patterns of staff recruitment and suspicious departures were being identified in several European royal households and prominent aristocratic families, suggesting that Blackwood's activities were part of a larger criminal enterprise.
"We're dealing with something unprecedented," Reynolds briefed the investigative team. "A systematic infiltration of the highest levels of society by individuals specifically targeting vulnerable young people. The implications extend far beyond this single case."
Prince Louis began working with Dr. Ashworth on processing his experiences and understanding that he bore no responsibility for what had been done to him. The psychological healing process would be lengthy and complex, requiring careful attention to his unique circumstances as both a trauma survivor and a public figure. Recovery from this type of systematic abuse requires rebuilding trust, not just in other people, but in one's own perceptions and judgments. Ashworth explained to the royal parents, "Prince Louis has been conditioned to doubt his own experiences and to prioritize others' needs above his own safety. Reversing that conditioning will take time and patience." The therapeutic approach focused on empowering Prince Louis to recognize his own worth and rights, while also helping him understand that seeking help and protection was not selfish or disloyal. The concepts of appropriate boundaries, consent, and personal safety had been deliberately undermined by his abuser and would need to be carefully rebuilt. James found his role evolving as the investigation progressed. Beyond providing testimony about his observations, he became a crucial source of continuity and stability for Prince Louis during an extremely disruptive period. The young prince had developed trust in James over their months of working together, making him uniquely positioned to provide support during the healing process. "Captain Morrison," Prince Louis said during one of their conversations, "I want you to know that I never blamed you for not seeing what was happening sooner." He was very careful to make sure no one would notice. The statement reflected Prince Louis's remarkable maturity and generosity of spirit, despite everything he had endured. Rather than harboring resentment toward those who might have protected him, he demonstrated understanding of the complex factors that had allowed his abuse to continue undetected. The legal proceedings against Blackwood began to take shape as prosecutors reviewed the evidence and prepared their case. The charges would be extensive: multiple counts of assault, abuse of position, and potentially trafficking-related offenses depending on the investigation's findings regarding the suspected network. Crown Prosecution Service lawyers faced the unusual challenge of pursuing a high-profile case that involved national security considerations and the privacy rights of a minor royal. The proceedings would need to balance the public interest in justice with the paramount concern for Prince Louis's well-being and recovery. Media speculation about the unusual security arrangements and Blackwood's sudden disappearance from palace duties was beginning to intensify. While no official statements had been released, the heightened police presence and changes to royal schedules were generating questions that would soon require careful management. Sir Nicholas Thornfield worked with the palace's communications team to develop a strategy for inevitable media coverage. The approach would need to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation while protecting Prince Louis's privacy and ensuring that any statements supported rather than undermined the legal proceedings. "We will provide appropriate transparency while maintaining our paramount duty to protect Prince Louis," Sir Nicholas explained during planning sessions. The public has a right to know that we take such matters seriously, but they do not have a right to details that could harm a young person's recovery. The investigation's expansion revealed additional victims who had suffered similar abuse at Blackwood's hands during his previous employment. 3 young people from aristocratic families had experienced comparable systematic abuse, though their cases had been covered up through financial settlements and non-disclosure agreements. These revelations added both strength to the prosecution's case and urgency to the broader investigation of the suspected network. Each victim who came forward provided additional evidence of Blackwood's methods and patterns, while also revealing the sophisticated system that had allowed him to move between high-profile positions despite his history of abuse. The coordination between various investigative agencies reached international levels, as evidence emerged of similar operations in other countries. Interpol became involved in tracking the movement of suspects and sharing intelligence about recruitment networks that had been placing predators in positions of trust and authority. Prince Louis's recovery continued under careful supervision, with gradual reintroduction of normal activities and responsibilities. His return to public duties would be managed carefully, ensuring that he felt ready and supported, rather than pressured to resume his royal role before completing his healing process. The young prince's resilience was remarkable, though Dr. Ashworth cautioned against mistaking his strength for complete recovery. Trauma healing is not linear, she explained to his family and support team. Prince Louis may have good days and difficult days, and we need to be prepared to adjust our expectations and support accordingly. Educational arrangements were modified to provide additional support and flexibility while ensuring that Prince Louis's academic progress continued. His tutors and instructors were briefed on trauma-informed approaches that would help him feel safe and supported while engaging with his studies. Pemberton, the etiquette instructor, expressed profound regret about her failure to recognize the signs of abuse during their sessions together. "I was so focused on protocol and presentation that I failed to see the person behind the position," she admitted during a debriefing with investigators. His reluctance and discomfort should have prompted questions rather than criticism. The systemic review of royal protection protocols was already underway, examining every aspect of staff recruitment, backroom checking, access controls, and supervision procedures. The investigation had revealed multiple points of failure that needed immediate attention to prevent similar incidents in the future. James Morrison's role in uncovering the abuse earned recognition from his superiors, but he remained focused on supporting Prince Louis through the ongoing challenges. The young prince's courage in finally revealing his experiences had triggered a process that would ultimately protect other potential victims, though the personal cost had been enormous. As the first phase of the investigation concluded and formal charges were filed against Blackwood, the focus began shifting toward the long-term implications of the case. The monarchy would need to demonstrate that it had learned from this failure and implemented meaningful reforms to prevent future abuse. The arrest had triggered alarms throughout the highest levels of British society, forcing uncomfortable questions about power, privilege, and the protection of vulnerable individuals within elite institutions. The answers to those questions would shape not only the future of royal security, but the broader conversation about accountability and transparency in positions of trust and authority. Prince Louis's courage in finally speaking the truth had set in motion changes that would extend far beyond his own situation, potentially protecting countless other young people from similar exploitation and abuse. The alarm had been triggered, and now the entire system was responding to ensure that such failures could never happen again. 6 months after Thomas Blackwood's arrest, the transformation within Royal Protection Services was profound and ongoing. The courtroom where his trial was concluding stood as a testament to both the gravity of his crimes and the courage of those who had brought him to justice. Prince Louis, now 15 and visibly stronger than during his darkest days, sat with his legal support team as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict that would close this chapter of his young life. The proceedings had been conducted with unprecedented care for the privacy and well-being of the victims. Special provisions allowed Prince Louis to testify via secure video link, sparing him the trauma of facing his abuser directly while still ensuring that justice was served. His testimony had been powerful and articulate, demonstrating remarkable healing and growth in the months since his ordeal had ended. The defendant systematically exploited his position of trust to inflict physical and psychological abuse upon vulnerable young people, Judge Elizabeth Cranbourne stated as she reviewed the extensive evidence presented during the trial. His actions represent not merely criminal behavior, but a fundamental betrayal of the sacred duty to protect those placed in his care. James Morrison, now promoted to Deputy Chief of Royal Protection following his exemplary handling of the crisis, watched from the public gallery as justice was finally delivered. The investigation he had initiated through his careful observations and moral courage had ultimately exposed a network of abuse that extended across multiple countries and institutions. The evidence presented during the trial had been overwhelming. Blackwood's journal entries, the physical evidence of systematic abuse, testimonies from multiple victims, and digital communications revealing his participation in a broader network of predators had painted a damning picture of calculated criminality. His attempts to portray his actions as legitimate discipline had been thoroughly discredited. On the charges of assault, abuse of position of trust, and conspiracy to commit child abuse, I find the defendant guilty on all counts, Judge Cranbourne announced. The sentence will be 25 years imprisonment, with a minimum term of 18 years before eligibility for parole consideration. The sentence reflected both the severity of Blackwood's crimes and the broader impact of his actions on the institutions he had infiltrated. His conviction had already triggered similar prosecutions across Europe, as the international investigation continued to expose the network of predators who had been placing themselves in positions of access to vulnerable young people. Prince Louis received the news of the conviction with quiet satisfaction rather than celebration. The months of therapy with Dr. Margaret Ashworth had helped him understand that justice was important for preventing future victims, but that his own healing was not dependent on his abuser's punishment. His recovery had progressed through his own strength and the support of those who cared about him. "I feel relieved that it's over," he told his parents after the verdict was announced. "But more than that, I feel proud that we stopped him from hurting anyone else. That makes everything worthwhile." The statement reflected the remarkable maturity and empathy that Prince Louis had developed throughout his ordeal and recovery. Rather than being diminished by his experiences, he had emerged with a deeper understanding of vulnerability, strength, and the importance of protecting others who might face similar situations. The reforms implemented within Royal Protection Services had been comprehensive and far-reaching. New protocols required multiple layers of background investigation for all staff members, with particular attention to unexplained gaps in employment history or suspicious patterns of job changes. Psychological screening had been added to the evaluation process, designed to identify individuals who might exploit positions of authority. Most importantly, new reporting mechanisms had been established that encouraged early intervention when concerns arose about staff behavior or interactions with royal family members. Anonymous reporting systems allowed colleagues to raise concerns without fear of retaliation, while regular check-ins with independent counselors gave younger royals safe spaces to discuss any uncomfortable situations. James had played a crucial role in developing these new protocols, drawing on his experience to identify the warning signs that had been missed in Blackwood's case. His insights about observation techniques, behavioral analysis, and intervention strategies became core components of the enhanced training program for all royal protection personnel. "The key lesson we've learned," James explained during a training session for new officers, "is that protection means more than preventing external threats. We have a duty to recognize and address threats that originate from within our own systems. Vigilance must be directed inward as well as outward." The international investigation had revealed the true scope of the network that Blackwood had been part of. Over 30 individuals across 7 countries had been arrested in connection with systematic efforts to infiltrate elite households and institutions. The coordination between these predators had been sophisticated, involving shared intelligence about security procedures, recruitment strategies, and methods for maintaining access to vulnerable targets. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Hartwell, now leading the newly formed Elite Protection Crime Unit, continued coordinating the international response to these networks. Her unit represented a new approach to protecting vulnerable individuals within privileged environments, recognizing that traditional security measures were inadequate against threats that originated from trusted insiders. Blackwood's case taught us that predators can be extraordinarily patient and sophisticated in their approach, Hartwell explained to colleagues from other law enforcement agencies. They study their targets' environments carefully, present themselves as ideal employees, and exploit the trust and discretion that characterize elite institutions. The psychological impact on Prince Louis had been addressed through ongoing therapy that acknowledged both his trauma and his unique circumstances as a public figure. Dr. Ashworth's approach had evolved to help him integrate his experiences in ways that strengthened rather than limited his ability to fulfill his royal duties and personal aspirations. Recovery from systematic abuse involves reclaiming agency and choice, Dr. Ashworth noted in her academic writings about the case. For someone in Prince Louis's position, this means learning to distinguish between appropriate expectations of his role and inappropriate demands that exploit his sense of duty. Prince Louis had gradually resumed his public duties, but with modifications that prioritized his well-being and continued recovery. His appearances were carefully scheduled to avoid overwhelming him, and he was given greater input into the activities and commitments that filled his calendar. The goal was to help him develop a healthy relationship with his royal responsibilities rather than viewing them as burdens or sources of vulnerability. His first major public appearance after the trial was a visit to a youth center that supported survivors of abuse and trauma. The choice of venue was deliberate and meaningful, representing his decision to use his experiences to help others rather than simply moving past them. His speech at the event was personal and powerful, though he shared only what he was comfortable revealing about his own journey. Everyone deserves to feel safe and protected, especially when they're young and learning to navigate the world, he told the assembled young people and support workers. If someone is hurting you or making you feel afraid, please know that it's not your fault, and there are people who will listen and help if you find the courage to speak. The audience's response was immediate and emotional. Many of the young people present had experienced similar exploitation and abuse, and hearing someone in Prince Louis's position acknowledge these realities with such honesty and compassion was deeply meaningful. His willingness to be vulnerable in public helped destigmatize conversations about abuse and encouraged others to seek help. The monarchy itself had undergone significant changes in response to the crisis. New oversight mechanisms had been established to ensure greater transparency and accountability in household management. Independent audit procedures regularly reviewed staff conduct and working conditions, while external organizations provided additional support for anyone who experienced problems within the royal household. These reforms extended beyond security considerations to encompass the broader culture within royal institutions. Training programs addressed power dynamics, appropriate boundaries, and the responsibility that came with positions of authority over younger or more vulnerable individuals. The goal was to create an environment where abuse would be quickly identified and addressed, rather than hidden or ignored. King Charles III had personally overseen many of these reforms, recognizing that the monarchy's reputation and moral authority depended on demonstrating genuine commitment to protecting those within their care. His public statements about the case had balanced acknowledgement of serious failures with clear commitments to preventing future incidents. The trust placed in our institution carries with it the most sacred responsibility to protect and nurture those who serve the crown, the king had stated in a rare personal address about the situation. We failed in that responsibility, and we are committed to ensuring such failures never occur again. The broader impact of Prince Louis's case extended far beyond royal circles. Educational institutions, youth organizations, religious institutions, and other organizations that work with young people had implemented similar reforms to their protection procedures. The case had become a catalyst for broader societal recognition of how predators exploit institutional trust and authority. James Morrison reflected on these changes as he completed his daily security briefing 6 months after triggering the investigation that had transformed his world. His decision to act on his observations had required tremendous courage, potentially sacrificing his career and reputation to protect someone who had been placed in his care. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had convinced myself that I was imagining things or that it wasn't my place to interfere, he confided to his wife during one of their evening conversations. The thought that Prince Louis might have continued suffering in silence is unbearable. His wife, Sarah, had supported him throughout the difficult months of investigation, trial preparation, and public scrutiny. You did what any decent person would do, she reminded him. You saw someone in danger and took action to help them, regardless of the personal cost. The personal cost had indeed been significant, James had faced intense media attention, legal proceedings, and professional scrutiny that had tested his resilience and commitment. Yet he had also experienced the profound satisfaction of knowing that his actions had prevented further harm and potentially saved other young people from similar exploitation. Prince Louis had maintained contact with James throughout his recovery, recognizing the crucial role the protection officer had played in his rescue. Their relationship had evolved beyond the formal boundaries of royal protocol to encompass genuine mutual respect and appreciation. The young prince's letters to James often expressed gratitude that went far beyond mere politeness. "You gave me back my life when you chose to act on what you observed," Prince Louis had written in one such letter. "I want you to know that I think about that every day, and I'm committed to living in a way that honors the courage you showed in protecting me." The ongoing therapy sessions had helped Prince Louis process not only his trauma, but also his feelings about the broader implications of his case. He understood that his willingness to speak the truth had triggered changes that would protect other young people, but he also grappled with the weight of that responsibility and the public attention it had brought to his personal struggles. Dr. Ashworth continued working with him to develop healthy coping strategies for the ongoing pressures of his position while maintaining the progress he had made in his recovery. The goal was to help him find ways to use his experiences constructively, without being defined or limited by them. Healing from trauma often involves finding meaning in survival, she explained to colleagues studying the case. Prince Louis has been able to transform his experiences into advocacy and protection for others, which has been crucial to his psychological recovery. The educational reforms within the royal household had also benefited Prince Louis directly. His tutoring arrangements now included regular check-ins with counselors, more flexibility in scheduling to accommodate his emotional needs, and curricula that addressed topics like personal safety, healthy relationships, and recognizing abuse. Mrs. Pemberton, the etiquette instructor who had unknowingly witnessed signs of abuse during her lessons, had undergone additional training in recognizing trauma responses and creating supportive learning environments. Her teaching approach had evolved to prioritize emotional safety alongside technical instruction. "I learned that true etiquette involves treating every person with dignity and respect," she reflected during a review session with other royal household staff. "My previous focus on form and protocol was incomplete without attention to the human element of education." The technological aspects of royal protection had also been enhanced in response to the investigation's findings. Digital monitoring systems now tracked staff access to sensitive areas more carefully, while communication protocols ensured that concerns about staff behavior would be promptly investigated rather than dismissed or overlooked. These technological improvements were balanced with human elements that recognized the importance of relationships, trust, and emotional intelligence in providing effective protection. The goal was to create systems that were both secure and humane, protecting against threats while preserving the personal connections that made royal service meaningful. As Prince Louis approached his 16th birthday, his recovery continued to progress remarkably. The confident, articulate young man he was becoming bore little resemblance to the frightened teenager who had once felt trapped by his circumstances and unable to seek help. His transformation served as a testament to both human resilience and the power of appropriate support and intervention. The upcoming milestone birthday would mark not only his personal growth, but also his gradual assumption of greater royal responsibilities. The preparations for this transition included careful consideration of how his experiences had shaped his perspectives on duty, service, and the use of privilege to protect and empower others. His parents, the Prince and Princess of Wales, had been profoundly changed by the experience of nearly losing their son to systematic abuse. Their approach to royal parenting had evolved to prioritize open communication, emotional support, and vigilant attention to their children's well-being above traditional expectations of stoic endurance. "We learned that being strong doesn't mean suffering in silence," the Princess of Wales had observed during a private conversation with palace staff. "True strength comes from seeking help when you need it and using your voice to protect yourself and others." The legacy of Prince Louis's courage in revealing his abuse would continue to influence royal protection protocols, child welfare policies, and institutional safeguarding measures for generations to come. The alarm he had finally allowed to be triggered had awakened not only those responsible for his immediate safety, but an entire network of institutions committed to protecting vulnerable young people. As James Morrison completed another day of ensuring the safety of those entrusted to his care, he reflected on the profound changes that had resulted from one young person's decision to trust an adult with his terrible secret. The prince, who had once felt powerless to protect himself, had become a powerful advocate for others facing similar situations. The transformation was complete not in the sense that healing had finished, that would be a lifelong process, but in the sense that tragedy had been transformed into purpose, suffering into strength, and silence into a voice that would continue protecting others for years to come. The alarm that had been triggered by Prince Louis's courage would continue sounding, ensuring that the failures that had enabled his abuse would never be repeated.